Hi folks, this is Gabriel Science with the second half of Chapter 5, Sensation and Perception for Introduction to Psychology. So the first slide we've got here for this second video is a bit of a practice GIF. Follow the instructions, look at the dot above. Try and view this image as not as close to the monitor, but as the only thing that you see. Pay attention to it. In a moment you'll see why. Whoa! Okay, did you perceive that? So what's going on is that this black and white image can be perceived as being full color based off the way that your eyes work. Remember that your eyes get tired of viewing information, and so by viewing this kind of negative of the visual information, your eyes get tired of perceiving these colors, so the opposite colors become more naturally visible. And for just a moment, you see a real life-ish like image of this black and white picture with lots of colors like greens and reds, because you assume, because the cells of the different parts of your eyes are ready to see things that way. Hope that makes sense to you. Feel free to go back and try this one a couple of times, or download the PowerPoint, try it on your own, and let it finish one more time. Make sure you really look at that dot. Oh, it's so weird. If you prevent yourself from looking around, the colors stay the same for a really, really long time. Okay, let's talk about feature detectors. Feature detectors are a particular type of neuron in your brain that is designed to detect specific visual features. Okay, that's not terribly confusing or exciting. How does it work? Okay, well, you have a neuron in your head that's good at detecting vertical lines, and so it's more active when there's a vertical line, less active when there's no vertical line, and sort of active when there's a sort of vertical line, like this diagonal guy over here. What's the purpose of these? How do they work? Well, if you're new to something, say like you just started a new job, you may not be used to seeing the right pieces of information. So with practice, you'll get used to seeing things, you'll get used to interpreting them in the ways that are beneficial to you, and so you can actually develop neurons that are specifically designed to see certain things because you have more practice. If you deliver pizza more often, you may have more practice at finding the signs for street names. If you work at a shoe store, you might have better practice at seeing the size of shoes, and so you may have neurons that are feature detectors specifically for those purposes. Okay, so what I've got here is an example of kind of a sad thing, but an interesting experiment in psychology. What we've got here is an image that shows a cat. It's got a ring around its neck so it can't see its own body, and it's placed in this circular tube that is only full of these vertical lines. So this is an experiment that was actually done with kittens who were raised in environments where there were only those vertical lines, and because of that, they only developed vision to understand and work with vertical lines. When they're placed outside of this environment, they had a lot of trouble perceiving information because information is much, much more than just vertical lines, and so because they've only developed those vertical lines, they were unable to understand what was going on around them, and they were especially unable to perceive horizontal lines. So kind of a cruel thing to do, but a cool thing showing you how our perception of visual information works. Next up, let's talk about parallel processing. So parallel processing is our ability to perceive multiple pieces of information at the same time. As an example, we process pretty much every visual piece of information in different ways at the same time. So when we see a picture of a bird, we naturally notice when we see a bird, we naturally notice how it's moving as well as the overall shape, silhouette. We notice depth, so how close or far away from us the bird is, and we also notice its colors. And so because we process all of these different pieces of information at one time, we are said to have parallel processing, the ability to process multiple pieces of information in parallel. It turns out that although different parts of our brains handle these different types of visual informations, our consciousness forms from the integration of all of that visual processing. There are different ways in which that consciousness and integrated processing can help or hurt us. For example, if we look at this picture, what we've actually got here are a bunch of circles with bits cut out of them. But can you see a cube? And if you pay attention, do you notice that the cube can be facing one way or another way, just kind of depending on how you want to look at the cube? The way in which we perceive objects to be together, parts of wholes instead of a bunch of individual things, is called Gestalt psychology, which comes from a psychologist whose name was Gestalt. There's a lot more to Gestalt psychology. If you want to practice answer the question, is this X closer to you on the box or farther away from you on the box? But if you want to learn more about Gestalt psychology, feel free. Personally, I think it's kind of uninteresting and boring, and I don't really feel like it has very many uses in real life. Many more uses if you want to do graphic design or design UIs or design things to be more friendly to people and easier to use. Not so much in general life, so there you go. Let's talk about depth and how we perceive the world. So when we're babies, it feels as though babies don't really look at what they're going, but they actually really do. And we can tell this from an experiment where babies are placed in a box that kind of looks like this, and they are placed on top of this glass. It's kind of hard to see in the picture, but there's a glass floor here for the baby, so there's no way it can fall down. But beneath the glass floor, there is a visualization of a floor and a fall or lower floor. A fall or lower floor, yeah, that makes sense. A much lower floor that could be perceived as a fall. The baby has not yet developed a perfect understanding of this glass and how it works, so it may just think that there's a cliff there. Go ahead and click on this link. It does a great job of showing you how babies navigate this depending on the information that their parents are giving them. I'll give you 3 seconds to do that. 3, 2, 1. Isn't that cool? Let's take a look at something else that's pretty cool. This is an illusion associated to monocular depth clues. It turns out that moons that are close to the horizon appear huge. In this case, the moon appears smaller because it is closer to your visual information, but I can tell you that if you go out at night, pay attention to where the moon is. If it's closer to the horizon, it'll look really big. If it's higher up in the sky, it'll look smaller. And that's just because it is relative to the rest of the information in our world. Monocular depth cues are depth cues, information about depth that comes from a single eye, or that can come from a single eye. So in this case, the depth cue references how far away is the moon, and therefore how big is the moon really. And the monocular depth clue is the fact that it can be seen in comparison to this horizon. Monocular depth cues can really be seen in a number of illusions that can interrupt the ways in which we perceive the world. So here's a picture of the moon that looks super, super, super huge because it's right on the horizon, and we know that it's on the horizon, which means it's really, really, really far away. If we just see it in the middle of the sky, we don't really have any reference point for how big it is or how far away it is, so we just kind of guesstimate and it feels a little bit smaller. Let's talk about perceptual consistency. Perceptual consistency is a really simple idea. We perceive things to be consistently the same. So this door, even though it's turning around and it looks like a different sort of rectangle when it's open, we perceive that it is still the normal rectangle. And if we are used to seeing things as a certain color, we will naturally perceive them as that color even if they change. You can actually notice this here on this other slide. I've got a cool little artistic drawing of the same girl with the same sets of eyes. What's going on here, though, is something weird. When you present these with the addition of a red or blue or yellow, cyan background, the color of her eyes seems to be a little different, even though the color of her eyes is not different at all. So with the red background, the eye looks cyan. With the blue, looks yellow. With a cyan one, looks red. This makes sense if you go match it up with the color opponent processing theory from earlier, but I've come up with a visual that can prove to you that they are still exactly gray. So what I've done is I've filled in her iris here, and I'm going to go ahead and make it bigger. And when I make it bigger, you'll notice that it is gray. It just seems blue because it's surrounded by red. Whoop! Crazy, huh? We can do that again. I'm not changing any colors, just changing the size of this gray rectangle, which looks cyan, looks bluish. But when it gets bigger, you can tell it's totally gray. And this girl's like, whoa, what's going on? Why are my friends gone? I don't know. Perceptual adaptation. So perceptual adaptation is our mind's ability to perceive things regularly once we get used to something weird. So what we've got here is a dude who's wearing a helmet, and with the helmet comes a pair of glasses that makes his perception upside down. His visual information is upside down. And if you wear them, after some amount of time, you will start to see the world sort of right side up, kinda. In actuality, what's going on is your brain just gets used to seeing the world upside down, and it lets you live in the upside down world without a problem. Funny thing is that after you take the helmet off, it takes a while to get your vision back to normal too. So perceptual adaptation can be helpful or harmful. As a reiteration, perceptual adaptation is our mind's ability to get used to weirdness in our world. Something that I got a couple examples about this. If you're used to living in a messy house, you may stop noticing the mess. And it's a lot easier to notice some mess in someone else's place than it is in your own, which is why it's easy to be hypocritical about messes. Another example of that is if you experience depression. It's easy to get used to depression. It's easy to get used to living that way. And it may be hard for you to notice that it's not normal. It's not a happy, positive state of being. But it could be easy to point it out in other people because you're not used to what their depression looks like. You're not living it every day. So be careful about perceptual adaptation. It's beneficial for us to be able to see things in ways that are helpful and normal, but not everything is normal, and we should avoid letting ourselves believe some things are normal just because we get used to them. Okay, the next couple of slides are a bunch of fun illusions. I'm going to talk through a couple of them, but I won't do that for everyone. Here we've got a picture of a sphere made out of grass, but if you look carefully, there's some weird stuff going on in the sphere, especially because these people who are at the top of the sphere appear teeny tiny. This guy looks really, really small, even though he's not particularly in a hugely different place on the sphere. What's going on is that actually this is not a sphere. It is a series of purposefully oddly shaped bits of grass, and because of the way they're oddly shaped, it makes sense that this guy is like almost sitting on nothing compared to this lady. It makes sense that the patches of grass are doing different things. It makes sense that this guy can hold onto a tree that's sprouting out of nowhere and be at an angle, even though not everyone is being at an angle. So it's a cool little thing. I believe this is an art installation in France. Next up, I've got a jittery cube. Oh, it's jittery. Oh, what's going on here is that the cube is actually faded and jagged in ways that your mind naturally interprets as motion. Your brain wants to assume that squares are squares, and that fuzziness implies movement. And so the jaggedness and the fuzziness tricks your eyes into thinking this thing is constantly moving. I promise it really isn't. There are ways you can skew with it, so if you try covering it all up, covering out the outside part and seeing only the inside part, you'll notice that the inside part starts moving. If you try covering up the inside part, you'll notice the outside part might stop moving, and if you cover up parts of it, you notice that different parts of it start moving. So there's no trick here. This is a static image. It's just your perception messing with you. Okay, so I've got a number of things going on here. Let's go through all of them. Over here, we've got a hallway that's painted to look like it has a dip, but it is actually perfectly flat, normal hallway. The reason they painted that is because it forces people to walk, not run, which is perfect for an elementary school hallway. In the middle, we've got a Necker cube. Again, notice how it can kind of be pointed one way or the other way depending on your choice. On the right side here, I've got another cool illusion. Can you tell that the man is facing to the right, but also facing towards you? In this case, if you focus on the eye versus the nose versus the mouth or the ear, your brain wants to fill in the rest of the face the way that it's supposed to be. So it can be easy for it to kind of see things one way or another way, when in actuality they're at a kind of an amalgam of both ways. So if you look really carefully, look at the eye and think about the nose. The nose is kind of really screwy. If he was facing towards you, it'd be like a really awkwardly upward turned nose. Same thing with the mouth. You would probably have like a cleft palate there. But this one in the middle, this is a fun one. Take a moment, look at this. Is this gray color here in the middle the same as this gray color? Turns out that they are exactly the same exact color. What I want you to do is take your fingers and place them right here in the middle, so you cover up this lighter spot and this darker spot. And if you cover it up with your fingers, you'll notice that they are exactly the same color shapes, except for those little middle bits there. What's going on is that your brain perceives this as a lighter part and a darker part, and therefore perceives this as a whiter and a darker image. However, that perception is totally flawed. There is actually no whiter or darker. There is only one color here, and these parts here have been artificially colored to look like they were brighter and darker, just like shade would naturally be. So because we know that things beneath other things should be darker and things above other things should be brighter, by cues like the shadow and the brightness here, our brains fill us in with a lie. This last one here is something you could stare at for ages. I'm not going to explain it. I'll just let you look at it. Which way is the thing moving? Is it turning around to the left or right? Or is it turning the other way? Or is it rotating top to bottom-ish? Feel free to watch it. See how it changes. It's confusing. It's confusing. The little bits of text and circles give it examples. We're going to move on. Another one here. What we've got here is a dancer. And if you look at the center one and ask yourself a question, is it going to the left? Is it spinning clockwise or counterclockwise? If you look at the left one or the right one, you'll notice that it feels as though it's spinning in opposite directions. But actually, all these three images are spinning in the same direction, which is neither. Turns out that our ability to understand the direction in which things are spinning has all to do with what gets covered up versus what doesn't get covered up. And so because this is a silhouette, because it's all black, it appears as though nothing is getting covered up and also everything is getting covered up at the same time. The way that the colors have been added in here on the left and right is what helps us perceive one direction or the other direction of rotation. I know, this is really, really, really weird, but it's good to know that the only reason we know which direction something is spinning is by knowing which thing goes behind which other thing at the same time. I hope that made sense. If it didn't, let's move on anyway. I've got here a very famous illusion, one where an inverted face looks like it's not inverted. So we're kind of seeing like the inside of a mask there, and now it's turning around, so we're going to see the front side of the mask. The reason this happens is that our brains are used to seeing faces, and they're used to seeing faces that jut out at us. So when we see this kind of inversion of the face, our minds naturally perceive it as the normal way we would see a face. Of course, that's not actually how things work. And because of that, there are a number of other illusions that you can make out of this inversion thing, which we'll see later on. Next up, we've got another depth manipulator. In this case, this image that sticks out at you looks as though it actually goes into the wall. And what's going on there is not so much that it actually goes into the wall, but instead that we assume that hallways go away from us, not into us, towards us, so it makes sense that we would perceive this in kind of a weird, awkward way. Next up, we're going to look at other areas of sensation. Feel free to click on this link and learn a little bit more about how feeling things with your hands and fingers can actually be good for your well-being. We're going to start this bit with a little bit of a video showing a lady who has an inability to feel pain. She was born with this due to a genetic malfunction. The first video is kind of a quick news spot that shows that as a child she has to be really careful and cared for and had a number of systems to keep her okay, because she can hurt herself, and that's okay. The problem is that if she hurts herself and she can't tell that she's hurt because she doesn't have that pain, she could really, really hurt herself. Imagine if you broke a bone and couldn't feel that it was broken, so you kept messing with it, it would break irreplaceably. The second video is kind of a follow-up with her, what she looks like a number of years later, so feel free to check that out. It's a heartwarming story. I'm glad that she's able to live on well. Next up, we have another video that shows how we can get pain to go away. A number of options for us there are distractions, familiarity, so things that you are used to are less painful, less scary, and also endorphins. Hugs, kisses, love, chocolate, dogs, lots of things. Anything that can release endorphins are going to reduce our pain. So you can actually see all three of these kind of in unison when you look at this doctor's strategy to make sure that kids don't cry when they get an injection. If you watch the full video, you notice that it doesn't work all the way, and ignoring pain is hard, but there are some things you can do to at least mitigate it or make you not notice it. To give a personal anecdote there, I usually don't feel pain from talking or from being on my feet until after I'm done working. And so when I'm done, then I start to notice it, and that becomes annoying, but that's okay. Part of the reason for that is because I'm focused on my job, so I may not notice the pain. Okay, let's talk about flow states. Flow states are those states in which you are so in tune with what you're doing that time seems to go by more quickly, you seem to have a higher ability to pay attention, you don't notice pain or being tired, and you may experience a feeling of euphoria. You might feel really, really good and positive. People who work really hard may experience this. People who are deep into sports may experience this. People who find something that they're passionate about may experience this. Excuse me, folks that you find on those videos about superhumanly fast working speeds are clearly experiencing these flow states. You can think of the flow state as being in the zone, and if you think about it as being in the zone, I'm sure that probably most people have experienced the flow state at some point or another. I have felt many, many flow states for many, many reasons. I get them when I'm playing video games that I really, really like. I get them when I'm working on my PowerPoint materials and I'm really enjoying them. I get them when I'm reading the comments that you guys leave for the exit slips in my classes. So there's lots of different ways that I get flow states, and if you find something that gives you a flow state, see if you can figure out how to make a job out of it. Here's another interesting example of a relative sensation that comes from taste. It turns out that the way that we taste things has something to do with our perception of our eyes. It turns out that if you taste water or anything from a straw versus a cup versus a mug versus a spoon versus just in your hand, the taste can be completely different, or at least mildly different. And then the reason for that is not so much that the water tastes different, but instead what's going on is that your expectation of what fluid you're drinking is different, so it kind of forms some different thing in your mind. So for me, water tastes better out of a spoon because I'm used to eating tasty things with a spoon. For me, a lot of drinks taste better in a mug because I really like coffee, and I have lots more positive experiences with mugs than with cups. Same thing with straws. So there you go. Okay, so let's talk about smell and memory and nostalgia. And if you're thinking that that sound you just heard might have been a smell, it's actually my chair from me leaning back. Turns out that our smell, our ability to perceive olfactory information, is very highly attuned to our memory banks. How does that work? Well, I can give you a couple examples. For example, a friend of mine was recently looking through a box of his old possessions, and he found a beanie that he told me smells like 2009. If you ever go to a restaurant that you haven't been to in ages and they still sell the same food, you can get nostalgia from that food. If you look at a picture of crayons, you may remember exactly how the crayons smell, and that's because smell is really strongly linked to our memories. And as an example of that, you there's an interesting bit of research that shows that memory testing for Alzheimer's patients, folks that may have a major memory issue from usually from age that deteriorates their memory to the point that they forget how to breathe and their organs forget how to work. Turns out that you can actually test Alzheimer's, of course, with a paper and pencil test. But a better test of it is through smell. The way it works is that you're presented with a vial of a fluid that has a certain smell to it, and then you're given a number of other vials, and so it's kind of a multiple choice test. Which one was the same? And so people who are better at remembering or correctly identifying which smell was the same, have better memories, and you can actually detect Alzheimer's with this test at a better, more consistent, faster rate than you can with your regular paper and pencil test. And so a lot of people want to have this be the new way that we test for Alzheimer's. It's also easier for the test to be administered. Okay, so touch may be one of the most important aspects of our senses, especially for emotional development here. I've got a link here to a video that will demonstrate how touch is so very important for our sense of positivity and emotional development. Go ahead and give that a link. Of course, I've got a screenshot here from one of our previous PowerPoints showing a little monkey who you may remember was really comforted by this touch of his fake mother. Makes sense that touch would be very important for the development of our emotions and communication because we get comfort through touch before we get comfort through any other sense that we have available to us. Okay, so you can hear my voice is starting to have trouble, and that's great because we're also at the last slide here for you. The last slide is embodied cognition. Embodied cognition is our way that we understand the world using both our bodies and our minds. It turns out that if we present our bodies in certain ways, that will confuse us into feeling certain things with our perceptions. We've talked about this before. If you ball up your fists and pretend to be angry, you may actually start to feel a little bit angry in your mind. And another version of this is that if you stand up and put yourself in a pose that's kind of like a superhero, you'll feel more confident. You'll do better on tests of ability. So power posing can make a real big impact on how well you do different things. More examples of embodied cognition, for example, are feeling colder when you feel socially excluded, feeling more friendly when you're holding a hot drink, or feeling less confident in ideas when your balance is weakened. Each of which, has a similar physical and mental feeling. If you would like to learn or see an example of power posing, go ahead and click the link. This is from a TV show, so it's not as sciencey as some of the other stuff. And if you've enjoyed the material, I really would love to hear what you have to say. That's the end of the material for this week. We just got a couple little bits of extra material and a number of vocabulary terms. I'm noticing now that the chapter 5 thing says chapter 4 here. Sorry about that. This is chapter 4, and we don't have that many bits of vocab for this chapter, so hopefully it should be an easier one before that first test in the semester. I really hope you've enjoyed the material for today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.